as we come to the end of this session, let's look at the advantages of formal strategic planning. One, it identifies risks. This happens because the planning process forces everybody in the company to think, and therefore assumptions that have long been held to be true can be questioned. Secondly, it forces managers to think. Thinking is not something which we do, which most people like doing. Thinking requires some amount of effort, and we really prefer to live in our own cloistered images of the industry. But strategic planning forces managers to think. Strategic planning forces companies to act. Here, the fact of the matter is that most companies assume that the future will be like the past, and therefore they continue to follow a set course of action. However, strategic planning will force the company to make strategic choices. Then, one great advantage of strategic planning is that it makes sure that there is a common understanding across the company. This is a very important benefit of strategic planning. Strategic planning ensures an understanding of long-term change. Due to changes in the external environment, due to changes in technology, changes in spending habits, changes in income earning potential, for all these reasons, there are long-term changes taking place in industry, and strategic planning helps the company to understand these changes. Strategic planning forces managers to be explicit. See, a lot of our assumptions are held in our minds. We don't make these assumptions explicit. However, strategic planning forces us to do that. Finally, strategic planning allocates responsibility to individuals. Now, these are the advantages of formal strategic planning. Now let's end with some of the criticisms of strategic planning. Well, strategic plans fail due to outside events. That's not really a fault of strategic planning. It's a fault of how strategic planning was done, because strategic planning implies that we look at outside events, right? So, this is not a criticism of the concept of strategic planning. It's a criticism of how strategic planning was applied wrongly. Second, strategic plans fail to understand internal conflicts. Here again, it's not a criticism of strategic planning, because one of the key components of strategic planning is to understand internal conflicts. So it simply means that strategic planning has not been done adequately. Number three, strategic plans are impractical. Now, normally when people say something is impractical, what they mean is that several changes will be required. Strategic planning ensures that all these changes are elaborated, that all these changes are specified. So, rather than strategic planning being impractical, strategic planning makes change possible. 4. Strategic planners not responsible for implementation. This is a valid criticism. This is a valid criticism because for a long time, till fairly recently, there were people within the company whose only job was strategic planning. Now, That's not the method that is being followed these days. Today, planning and implementation go hand in hand. Top management is not all-knowing, certainly. Here again, this is very valid criticism. Earlier, strategic planning in the earlier days used to be a top-down process, right, which is subject to this criticism. However, strategic planning now is not a top-down process, it's top-down and bottom-up. Well, then there's a question of strategic planning creates costly infrastructure. Now, it does in fact, it did in fact create costly infrastructure earlier, because there were some people whose only responsibility was planning. But now that strategic planning as a function has been devolved, has been delegated to people across the company, so this entire infrastructure, the infrastructure of planning, is not required, right? So what we see is that there is a lot of truth in these criticisms, but many of these criticisms are not valid anymore because of the changes that have been made in the implementation of the process of planning. So with that, we conclude our understanding of strategic planning as a technique.